Okay, greetings, brothers and sisters. This is a little introduction to a video about cult and cult leaders and spiritual organizations and all these other things. But this is a regal moth, and I've seen this a number of times, maybe 5 times in my life. I've seen one of these. It looks like almost like a Muppet. This looks like some sort of cuddly little, just beautiful, giant moths. These are about the size of my hand here. You can see somebody with their hands here. I mean, 5, 6 inches, wingspan. Um, you know, I mean, they're just huge. This is the caterpillar, which my wife and I just saw, and I'll show you this now. So this is the picture of the caterpillar. I have a short video of it coming up here. This is all going to tie into what I'm saying in my voiceover. And this is the praying mantis. I forgot I took a picture of this. It grazed my shoulder and then landed on a weed, and my wife and I were able to see it. And then here's a video of the caterpillar. It's just huge. It's about 5 inches long, an inch thick. I mean, it's a big animal. And we were able to my wife spotted it. It's how these animals display themselves. And then a couple days later, I saw this. This is an eastern king snake. I've never seen one of these snakes before. This was about 10 inches long. It's a baby. And it was in our walking path. And just how these animals end up displaying themselves, where they're hidden in the forest. And every once in a while, you get to see them here as disappearing in the grass. And I'm going to talk about this in the voiceover. There's a picture I got of the thing, a clearer picture. But all right, let's get into the voiceover part here. Okay, greetings, brothers and sisters. I might do an introduction to this thing, so this will be the second greeting if I do that. The introduction will be about a giant caterpillar we saw, and/or I don't know if I'll include that, but I have a video of us finding a baby common eastern king snake, and I'll at least post the picture here. Hopefully, if I remember to do that, but I have some pictures of it. It was, I just happened to see the rings around it, and I haven't seen a snake like that before. My wife and I go on these, nature walks, and we often, interact with animals. The other day, something flew by me and bumped into my, my arm, my shoulder, and it was a praying mantis and landed right on a plant near us. And then, we just see all these kind of neat things. If you go out in nature, you're going to interact with animal life. And snakes, I have mixed feelings about them. They're the ones that aren't poisonous. Even the poisonous ones serve a purpose in terms of keeping the rodent population down and other things. And there is always the danger of stepping on like a poisonous snake, which sucks when when you go out in nature, you can get poison ivy or, stand on a ground nest. There's always these, pitfalls. And, in some places there's big animals, they might eat you. But that's kind of rare. The big killer, of course, is mosquitoes. That kills over 1 million people a year. That's the number one killer in the animal kingdom. But anyways, seeing a king snake, and I had seen a snake maybe 6 months ago that first I thought was a corn snake, then realized it was a different form of a king snake. And it's always good to see them, particularly because they eat other snakes and they are immune to venom. And so I looked up this snake last night, the eastern king snake, and it said that they're immune to venom. And the first comment, there was a comment that was highlighted. I looked it up on my phone. And it said she saw a king snake at her house, some woman, the commenter. And she was glad about that because she's just seen copperhead, right? Now, I've seen, the 2 poisonous snakes I've seen was once we were hiking in the Blue Ridge Parkway, and my son called all of a sudden. He was walking, we were walking through an area that had some leaves on it, It wasn't mowed, but they had cows there. They ran cows on this area. And there was these cool hills, and, it was mountainous, hilly. And he walked up on a rattlesnake, big one. And he just happened to see it in front of him. I've done that, just even recently, 3 times where I'm walking, and there's a snake on the path. And usually snakes on the path are sunning themselves. They're lethargic because they need heat. That's why they would be out in the open like that. But a number of times I've looked down and there's a snake I'm about to step on, which is, always cause for concern. And then I've seen 4 copperheads. Copperheads are a kind of interesting looking snake, but, there's our pit vipers. And so I explained to my wife she hadn't seen a copperhead before, so I showed her a picture of it. We were talking about the king snake, and then I went home. We got home, and I looked at a video of the fight of the snake. I thought it might have been a king snake, but I didn't know what it was. And I looked it up, and I saw a video. I clicked on a video to tell you everything you need to know about the king snake. And the first comment was about how she had seen copperheads. So she was glad to see the king snakes because they eat them. And then there was a video recommended of a king snake eating a copperhead, and that made me feel good because, our dogs. I mean, they don't know better, and I'm sure they're naturally wary of snakes, and they chase things and they're small. But you always have to worry about poisonous snakes. It's one of the pitfalls of going out for walks and things. But, I was thinking about this king snake thing. And, it's also combined with what I'm about to say about cult leaders and cults, right? I've been asked by multiple people to talk about organizations, intentional organizations, and, there are things that people are involved in, or they've left or whatever. They want me to condemn something or, comment on, specific things or whatever. And, it's never been my job to keep the truth community pure or these things. Like, I comment on things when they cross my path. But I wanted to talk about cults and cult leaders and organizations and intentional communities and all of these things. And it's a mixed bag because to really build a pocket of the future, you need a community. And so a community of people who are capable and are willing and, are working now to prepare for what's about to come and are, gathering skills and resources. And it's one of the things my family and I ran into years ago. When we started living on a homestead, we started in 2000, I don't know, 5 or 6 or whatever it was. And, not having a community was just very obvious, a hole in the whole thing. It's hard to do something on your own, even as a family, and you need a community. But communities in themselves suck, and there was a community my family and I bought cows from, Twin Oaks, one of the famous intentional communities. It had 100 people there, always. It was always 100 people based in, I believe, B.F. Skinner, some research, a behavioral psychologist or something. And, we interacted with the people there. They had like an epic vegetable garden and cows, and we bought some of the cows. They milk cows, but they also had meat cows there. And, the people we talked to, like, weren't loving it there, right? It was a struggle. One guy said it was like being married to 100 people or 99 other people. And that's one of the better ones. There's these communities that go down, but usually there's 2 negative outcomes to all these things. And, I'm painfully aware of them and have seen them outside, just in terms of communities I know about. And then what happened with Heartfulness, the Sajmark system, which is, still it sort of stings me a little, I mean, it still kind of stings, because it's not really like, I don't know, whatever, I don't think about it, but it's not a great thing. And so first of all, what I was saying, I did a video about the cult of Trump, and I meant to add this in there, but I realized this could be a standalone video if I gave it the proper time and attention. And so I was talking about in the cult of Trump, this was, a definition given by Master Chargy, the third master of the Sajmark system. And like I think I've reworded it to make it, clearer in terms of what I think about it, but it's basically the same thing. And what he said is a spiritual leader sacrifices their needs to serve God and the followers, the people in the organization. So if you're in a true spiritual organization, or just in a community, it could be something like what Jesus was, right? Was in, what Jesus created when he was alive, not, post his death, but when he was alive. And there, is a number of saints and people who have done this. And so a true spiritual organization is where the leader of the organization is a saint, a high developed soul And they sacrifice their own personal needs to serve other people. And I saw this with Master Chargy, which I'll get to in a bit. And, that's a healthy spiritual organization where the leader is connected to God and giving to the followers. But there's a negative outcome for that situation, which I'll get into as well. And the second thing is a cult is where the spiritual leader is parasitic and the followers sacrifice their needs and their resources to serve and support the master, the system, the cult leader. And that has obvious consequences as well. When people think of themselves as kingly or saintly or above other people, even if they have something, they're a little bit smarter, they have a little bit of something, charisma, like Trump has something, right? Trump has something where he's, higher developed than many of his followers. He's smarter than many of his followers. And he's got, the ability to be a salesman and whatever. He's got some charisma, whatever he's got. And it's enough to win a following, but it's not, anything substantial. And he's disconnected from God. And that's the other thing. A spiritual leader, and he's, of course, a politician, but a spiritual leader that gets disconnected from God starts to feed off the energy of the fans, right? We see this with celebrities, Madam Expiration Date, I've talked about so much, Will Smith. And what happens is that the energy needs to be growing. It's not enough to sustain the leader. The leader, when they have like a fan, they got fan-supported prana. They're sucking the prana, the spiritual energy, creative spiritual energy off of the crowd and their adoration. And, it's an ego-based pursuit. And it needs to grow. It needs to be something that it's not sustainable because it's a low level of, energy support. And the celebrity gets addicted to it. And then their audience shrinks and they don't have it anymore. You used to be this person. Oh, remember when you were famous? All these things, right? And it's like their energy source gets cut off from them. And, this is where cults get twisted, and you see it in the celebrity culture. And so a true spiritual leader is connected to God in a deep way, internally. But they can lose that connection. They can lose their focus on God and focus on the masses, right? They forget they're serving God and they start serving their followers. And their followers start sucking the life out of them because that's what happens. Then they don't have that infinite supply of eternal love. This pranahuti in the Sajmark tradition. You have love to give. You can give freely of your love if you have more coming in, right? And you have more coming in because of your connection to God. But as soon as you forget about God, and this happens to a lot of saints, even to Jesus, at the end of his life, this is, some of his comments about Father, why hast thou forsaken me, was, about that, right? Because he ended up, being focused on his people he was serving. His disciples, of course, betrayed him. So this is a very common situation where a true spiritual organization falls and then it becomes a cult. And all religions are cults, and that it happens when it becomes a religion as well. In this sense, because the followers start serving the leadership, the clergy or whatever, and the clergy becomes more and more demonic, like you see with the Catholic Church and the pedo priests and all these things. And so this is why these things happen, because the once great spiritual leader, the once saint, has a fall. And so when you have an initial organization, everything starts off with a honeymoon period. It sucks you into things. That's, things start off with a honeymoon period. But it can only go two ways because of the nature of human beings and egos and things like this. Unfortunately, it can only go in two ways. And so, one, the leader turns into a demon, or two, the followers suck the life out of the leader. Right? As long as the leader is connected to God, then that won't happen. But, the followers become more and more life-sucking themselves. It happens in relationships, marital relationships, friendships, where there's an exchange of energy, ghoulish vampirishness and all these things. And so I want to get into it here. So, the first thing you have to do when you're an organization, like evaluate the leader, see what they're getting out of it, right? Are they needy? Do they need to be reinforced all the time? Are they, fragile in some way? Do they constantly have to be, praised? What do they feed on? Do they feed on adoration? They feed on, whatever it is, right? I mean, whatever they're getting out of the, if they're getting something out of the organization and the people following them, like are they giving or are they takers? And most of the people are going to be takers or turn into takers at some point. They're going to exploit the people that are following them. You can see it with Trump, and you can see the effects of it. Like, what has Trump done in terms of what it's like to have Trump in your life, and we all have Trump in our life to some extent. And it's a real bummer and negative, right? Because he's not connected to God, and he's, just this. I mean, right now he's just sucking energy off of his followers, and he's parasitic and money and all these things. You can see what Trump's getting out of this. He has this weapon he uses sometimes. His fans he uses as a weapon. His supporters, his voters, and he uses them in various ways to provide income for him, money, and and then give him energy at these rallies when he speaks, and the adoration that he feeds off, and all these other things. He likes to be appreciated. He likes to be told how great he is. All this stuff. You can see what he likes just based in his speeches and what he needs. And I've covered this in 3 recent videos, so I don't want to get in on Trump. But you can obviously see this is a cult where Trump is using his followers, and his followers are suffering in some way. He's hurting them on multiple levels, and all of us, because he's a taker, and he's not connected to any sort of divine source where he can get the energy, the prana, the spiritual energy. Everyone needs God's love. He gets it in a perverted form, in a less pure form from his followers. And this is like, what cult leaders do. So if you're in an organization that has one person making the decisions and holds all the power, you have to look at what that person's getting out of it, and you have to evaluate their tendencies, even if you've been sort of starstruck or, a lot of people are desperate, so they need somebody to, all the Trumpers are desperate people. They need someone to lie to them because they can't handle what's going on, and they have to have this imaginary outcome of some "Make America Great Again" thing, whatever that can never be, and they just can't accept that. So that's where their weaknesses. And most people who come to these organizations are looking for something. Their prana is low, their love energy is low, and they need a group support. They need whatever, and so they'll ignore all the warning signs because of their need, right? They're desperate for something, and they don't pay attention to the glaring character faults of the leader that are just going to get worse as time goes on. Those things you see maybe initially as small little incidences where a person's snappy, or they have these moments, and they turn into a full-blown demon by the end of the by the end of the organization. And you can see how the person you know, gathers people to them, right? If this person's like using other people, using like say the Bible, or using, somebody else's, like they don't have their own spiel. They just take from other people, and they, piece together a dogma from other, religions or whatever, other, people who have creative energy. They just sort of plagiarize all this stuff, and then they repackage it and sell it to the masses. I've talked about that Book of Eli movie where the post-apocalyptic like gang lord is looking for the Bible to use it to control his people, because he knows it's he knows how to control people through the Bible. He's not Christian, he's not religious, but he knows he can use it as a control weapon. And so that's a cult. And like I said, things have their honeymoon period, but then issues are going to come up, and the cult leader is going to take more, and the people are going to start realizing they're being drained, and they start being drained, and they're looking for their needs being met. They realize they've been exploited. They start rebelling or whatever it is, and things just fall apart from there. And you can see if there are a lot of people who have left and have these strong reactions to leaving, feeling like they were wronged or whatever. These are other indicators of, something that's doomed for failure. The other situation is where there's a pure spiritual leader who retains their connection to divinity and they just give and give and give. And, that's a positive organization. Unfortunately, I witnessed this with Master Chargy. Master Chargy was somebody who he had all this loving energy that he was exuding all the time. Of course, he was able to transmit through the Sajmark process. Those of you guys who are not aware of what I do in terms of the Sajmark meditative system, there's these spiritual meditations you do where the master of the system transmits this energy and preceptors are able to transmit it. And the energy is used to clean your etheric heart of samskaras and other, whatever it is, like your impressions that block you from connecting to divinity and fills you with this spiritual energy. And it's wonderful. Like, it's transformational. And Master Chargy was someone who slept probably like 4 to 6 hours a day, even when he was older. And he just worked all the time. Like, he spoke 29 languages. He was a successful CEO of a business in India where he had, money, and, he made his own money, so he didn't need to be supported by his followers. He, was a disciple to Babaji, the second master of the system, who was a, transformational being who was, more spirit than human. And so he was, trained by this person, and he was working to pay off his, spiritual debt and commitments to carry on this work. And, my experience of him, which I don't want to say I took for granted, I always appreciated it, but, we all took it for granted to some extent. And if you would write him a letter, he responded to hundreds of letters every day, then eventually emails, handwritten letters or typed letters. I mean, I started in 1993. And the internet, of course, took over. And he would, not only write you back, but he would do spiritual work on you, and you would feel it. Like, as soon as you sent the letter, even before he got it, spiritual work was happening. And when you came to meet him, he would transmit to you, read your condition, and clean your, spiritual centers, and transmit to you through these sittings, but also just being around him. And when you're around him, you absorb this positive energy. And so many of us had benefited from this. I didn't meet Babaji, the second master, but my preceptor, the guy I started with, people who were able to do this transmitting, their spiritual system was rewired so they could also, be conduits for this energy. And, Babaji, people go visit him in a very rural, poor village in northern India, Western people, hippies and things. And this preceptor described to me that, he would go there and Babaji would sit and there would be a circle of people, and Babaji smoked a hookah. It had, tobacco, jaggery, and charcoal in it. It was like a water pipe, hookah. And he would, sit there, and he really didn't eat much. The hookah was his like one connection to the physical world. And he would sit there, smoke the hookah, and he knew people would come to him, and he'd look at the person, and they'd look at their heart, and then he'd look away and smoke his hookah, and look back, and then he'd, look at the person very lovingly and say, now I'm on your case. And like what that meant was not only the spiritual cleaning and the transmission, but also helping to create the events in the person's life that would lead them to God, like the things a person needed to go, and, purifying their soul's path. And, he was on their spiritual case, like a spiritual caseworker. And, this is something Master Chargy continued. I mean, he gave all these talks and gave all these sittings, and he was constantly, making himself available to people. And, towards the end of his life, some local, important, businessmen who were involved in the system, one of them, an elder, comes up and accuses him of giving the properties to his son. He had one son. The masters of the system were married. They had, they had normal lives, right, families and things, and accused him that he was giving all these properties and ashrams to his son. And Chargy got really hurt by that. Like, he was, it was like a guy with like 5 other important guys all came up with this paranoid conspiracy theory, and he he was hurting for like a week. He just didn't want to do the work anymore. He was like kind of devastated by, all the work that he had done, and he was still being accused. His integrity was being accused, and things like this. And that's what people inevitably turn on you, even when you're giving you all these things. He talked about the people in his inner circle, and he talked about how it's always like 3 out of 12, like what happened with Jesus and the three disciples, that stab you in the back, and even after just these people were around Chargy all the time, absorbing this energy. When you came into his presence, he had this wonderful energy, and these people now have. These were guys that were around him his whole life. And, of course, Kamlesh Daji, the current leader, who's had a spiritual fall and he's disconnected from God. And, it was a hard thing to watch. Someone who I benefited from, like in the early stages, he did spiritual service that personally I benefited from. He was a good preceptor before that. But whatever his ego, whatever happened there, he plummeted like a stone. And he was given all the spiritual powers and all the elevated spiritual conditions, which I witnessed. Like I could see the work that was done on him, to some extent. As from my level, I could see it. I could see the changes in him. But he pooped the bed, right? He just, he just failed, almost inexplicably. But towards the end of Master Chargy's life, he was, he had cancer. He had bone cancer, prostate cancer. In his past lives, he was Spartacus or he was one of these famous figures who was a slave. And he was in shackles and chains. And because of that, in this life, he had pain in his legs. He was St. Paul in a previous life, and he had some residual physical issues because of that. And he could only see out of one eye, and he would be hooked up to a respirator. And, the last years of his life, he went into a coma in 2011, and for about, like a long time, like 3 or 4 months, he was gone. And everyone thought he was going to die. And he pulled out of it, and then he was good for a couple of years, but then his health just kept on deteriorating. And then he passed away in 2014 at the end of it, right before, December of 2014. And those last years I was in India from 2013, my family and I were on and off in India. We spent most of our time in India during that period. And he would, he was on and off in terms of his availability and his ability to give these sittings. And, he was training Daji to become his successor, and Daji was taking over a lot of the work. And I saw him make himself available when he could. He would come out. There was a master's cottage that was gated, gated area, and people could go in and see him. But, there was a time where he was at home. He had built a house, in an affluent neighborhood. He was a rich businessman. And it now was his son's house. And then there was the ashram he built, and there was these master's cottage, nice area. The whole ashram was like a botanical gardens that had been, made beautiful. It was 20 acres, and he had this little area in there. And, you would ask to go see him, and, occasionally I would go ask to see him. Usually I didn't, want to bother him. But he got too sick to be there, so he was staying at his son's house. And, there was these people, mostly European people, that were going to his house, some Indians. And it was in a neighborhood where the rest of the people weren't part of it, right? They weren't into it. And there would be all these cars on the road, cabs coming in and out, 200 people standing around his house trying to go in and see him, and he was physically not well. And, my family and I were brought there by somebody to see him, and I wasn't really all that comfortable with it. Because, Babaji, towards the end of his days, the people started to want to see him at a gathering, and he was really sick. And they were going to like bum rush the gates. It wasn't like they had security, but it was just volunteer people. And so eventually they just put Babaji behind like some ropes, and, the people were allowed to like view him like he was an exhibit at a zoo, like walk by him like he was just sitting there, like, half asleep and sick, But things like that, that I'd heard. And I mean, just, you got this energy from the sittings, this prana, and it's God's love. And I've experienced it, and it's been transformational for me. Like, it's filled holes in my personality. Like, I was so low functioning I was just an underachiever. I had, talents and abilities, but was never able I wasn't able to graduate college. I dropped out of college twice before, getting my bachelor's degree, and then got my master's degree, all after doing Saj Marg. I couldn't sustain relationships. I never could date. I was engaged to one woman and almost to another, but things just lasted a year. I just couldn't sustain things, and couldn't sustain jobs. I couldn't it was about a year I could tolerate something. Sometimes 2 years, but very, very, just the second year sucked. So I just couldn't function, right? Didn't have any purpose or goals. And the transmission, the cleaning, filled all those holes and, made me be able to do the things that I couldn't do before. And, I wasn't wanting for something. I wasn't desperate or needy. The transmission just filled these things that, you have a need for love, right? And people get that need filled in various ways. I talked about the 5 love languages in the, Trump video. But you get, love directly from the source, which is God's love in its purest form, and it's most potent, it's most nutritious on that level, right? And these people have been getting this love for years. But anyways, we go to his house, and there's lots of people there, and I'm feeling very uneasy about it. And then they walk us around the back of his house. I'd been to his house, 4 or 5 times before. He had made me a preceptor, 1994 or whatever. So I was a little bit familiar with the place. And we walked around the back of it. And as you came around the corner, they stopped you, and he would, he was interacting with people ahead of you. And we came up, and Kamlesh Daji, the now master of the system, said, "It's Paul Romano, master." And, I went up to him, and he grabbed my hand, and he was like, there was just this loving energy, people who were, witnessing this or, who were there. I mean, he was just exuding love. He was, physically at the end of his life, he was broken down. His body was riddled with cancer, and he had all these health issues, just beyond that. He was in physical pain all the time, barely cognizant a lot of the time, was on all these medications. And he was just giving of himself, he was just pouring out, it hurt me to see him in that kind of situation. And then, and these people are just, they'd seen him so many times in their lives, and they were just trying to suck a little bit more out of the guy, right? I mean, he gave everything he had. And so, later on, Kamlesh would give a talk about these people who were over the house and all the problems they were causing in the neighborhood, all the problems they were causing with the family, stressing out the family, because they were, Chargie's son had a family who had a son who had a job and 2 grandkids and, a household to maintain. And 200 people were descending on their house every day, trying to force their way in. Daji said there was a time where, Babaji had called people who would meditate in his presence without him being ready to give this transmission that he gave, this spiritual energy, bloodsuckers. Because, if he wasn't ready to give the energy in it, the energy would flow naturally. But if you meditated, you'd be drawing his energy from him. And if he wasn't ready to give a sitting, it would suck his energy out, So, there was this, unwritten rule that you weren't supposed to meditate. And Charlie would be inside being groggy, and would have trouble just waking up and how you wake up and you're you maybe you have a hangover, or you've been sick, or you've had a whatever it is, and you're disoriented, and it takes you a while to shake it off. You might need to drink coffee or whatever, to sort of wake up and something like that. He woke up like that every day, and he was he was physically taxed, and these people were meditating and sucking his energy outside. They were just meditating without him ready to give it, and it was bad. And his son, Master Charji's son, Krishna, gave a similar talk. It wasn't as harsh as Daji's. Kamlesh said, that Babaji said you only need to see your master once in your life. You only need to meet him once. That was enough for you to, to do this system, the master of the system. And he said, every time after that was a bonus. And Daji said, "How many bonuses do you need?" He was saying to these people. But then he said, I'm saying this to you all. It's Sunday, but all the people who need to listen to it aren't even here for group meditation. They're over at the house sucking the life out of this poor old guy, right? And then Kamish gave another talk where Chargy came out and was like on a golf cart, and everybody stormed him, was around him, and they were like, "Hey, man!" They're all yelling to him and all this stuff, like fans do. And Dodgy came out and said, "You should be more mature than that. You guys were acting like a bunch of monkeys, like," which is insulting for whatever. He said, like, if you guys were just there and just enjoyed his presence, and but then I was talking to a new person, and I think the person was from like Russia, young woman, Russia or Europe or something, and she was meeting Chargy for the first time, and she went to his house, and he's a new person, and she felt uncomfortable, like really was into the system, but she felt uncomfortable because he was so sick, and he was so weak, and she said, we were sitting there, and it was kind of great, and some woman rushed up to Chargy like to give him a hug or something. He put up his hands in front of him, like, just please, please, like, just, aren't I giving you enough? And, he had to be, he had to leave. And this woman was feeling bad about it. Like, she was thinking about it all the time, right? Like, she was telling us we were just basically new people, strangers that she was just meeting. And she had this experience, right? And so, I saw this, and I mean, he was doing his duty to God, and, that was, and, paying off his spiritual debt to his master, whatever it was, his guru Dakshina. And so, that was all part of it for him, and, that was his end of it. But the way people treated him, these life-sucking freaking spiritual vampires in the system, and I'd seen it over and over again, and we all made mistakes, and we all made it harder on him. Like, we all could have done better, and we all could have participated more, and we all could have taken more responsibility. So many people are like, well, the master will do this, the master will do that. And, they would get gross. They would do things that were hard on them or bad for them, that would be bad for their spiritual condition. And, then they would have to clean up the mess. That, there was some senior person, some older person, one of the early practitioners that came over from America was telling me a story where they were all doing drugs and LSD, and Babaji was chastising them and having to clean up and rewire their spiritual systems because LSD messed with their spiritual organization, their internal spiritual organization. And so there was a story where these two people left Babaji's house, and they came to visit Charji in southern India. Babaji was in northern India. And Charji gave them a sitting, and he said, "What do you guys do on the train?" And they go, "What do you mean?" He goes, "You guys did something because you're gross as F. When you left Babaji's house, he would have cleaned everything there was there to clean in your internal system. And, it's gross. You're gross." And, they said, "Oh, we smoked some hash on the train, right?" I think I met the guy the guy was telling me the story. I don't know. A lot of these things blend together, over the years. But the bottom line is, people made it harder on the master all the time. And so that's a pure spiritual organization where the master is serving, connecting people to God, and is uncorruptible, isn't going to, have a spiritual fall. And the people suck. And like, when Daji collapsed, what's happened in the system now is this guy Daji took over Kamlesh, and he did a good job at first, but he's just been awful, and he's turned it into a cult. And you guys who watch the Journey series, you'll know what I'm talking about. I've talked about this in depth, and I had personal witness of him being given the spirit. I saw his spiritual evolution to where he was given all the power and the energy and all the prana, all the God's love. He's forgotten about God, and he's all ego now, and he sucks, and he's stupid, and all these guys that I know. I know a lot of these guys who are around Master Charji all the time. Charji gave this talk where he talked about how the people around him, his so-called inner circle, these were guys who could just walk in. They didn't have to, they could go and see Charji anytime they wanted. And a lot of them were rich businessmen that donated money, and they were, they did a lot of the work for the system, but he said they're rude, they have bad egos, poor character qualities. He gives this talk, and I've played the talk before. In fact, I'll go ahead and play that talk now. Here. I watched a little bit of the clip and I realized the word abhyasi means spiritual aspirant. So someone coming to the Sajmark system and doing the meditation is an abhyasi. So when he talks about their transformation and responsibility, that's what he's talking about here.
That maybe the master's role is 99% or more, and the abhyasi's role in personal character transformation or formation even less than 1%. I am forced to this, shall I say, conclusion, because that is how it appears to be, and people are not really serious about character formation or character transformation. Why I say this is because, as I said before, spirituality is given by the master, and that formation or character transformation. I say conclusion, because that is how it appears to be, and people are not really serious about character formation or character transformation. Why I say this is because, as I said before, spirituality is given by the master, and that cannot be doubted. But their outer behavior, their outer lifestyle, the way they conduct themselves, their politeness or lack of it, and as repeatedly pointed out to me by abhyasis from all over the world, especially the behavior of those very close to me, what the outside world calls the inner circle. I used to feel concerned, then I used to feel pained. Now I really feel guilty. I feel guilty because the people close to me, my inner circle so called, are one and all arrogant, proud, demanding, oppressive, authoritarian, and lack politeness. One and all. Of course, I keep telling them about this. Either they smile it off or they say, yes, yes, we will change now. But recent affairs, especially when I was in Tirupur, immediately following dear brother Ajay Bhattar's revocation of his nomination to succeed me, it has shown the raw human nature at its worst. Gossiping, condemning, blaming, always others. Forgetting the principle that when you point your finger at somebody, one finger, three fingers are pointing towards yourself. So what to do about this, you see? How to make abhyasis realize that the master's responsibility or his, duty towards an abhyasi, if I should call it that, is hardly 1%, probably 1,000th or 1,000,000th of a percent. Whereas the abhyasi's role, responsibility in making himself, transforming himself, should be 99% or more. It's exactly opposite. Now, what are the consequences? People close to me think that because I keep them close to me, continue to keep them close to me, they are blameless. They are really blameless, and I'm only talking for fun or to show off or something like that, like chastising a pet. And people who are away from me, but who are close to me in an inner sense, they stay away. I remember Babuji Maharaj had a dog, Honey. And he was not fond of dogs, but it was there and it remained there. It used to run around chasing the monkeys. And he used to tell me with a twinkle in his eye that, honey recognizes Abhyasis. Because when Abhyasis come, they don't bark. He doesn't bark. Only barks at non-Abhyasis. And, I never understood the significance of Babuji praising this dog for this quality, that it does not bark at Abhyasis. A dog. And my people around me, they're all the time barking, shutting doors, putting away people, using my name for everything that they do. He is ill, he is resting, he is asleep, he told us no, so on and so forth and so forth. I get letters from very, very close, devoted Abhyasis who love me, saying I cannot come. And I will not come so long as I stopped. For them too, it is a need to transform themselves. Because as Babuji once said, two lovers cannot remain separated because the circumstances are not favorable. You know the old saying in English, love laughs at locksmiths. Doesn't mean it only laughs at locks. The locksmith is symbolic of every circumstance that can come between the lover and the beloved.
There's one more story here, then I just want to wrap this thing up in my own personal view and, role in all these types of, social dynamics. So the guy in the video, Master Charji, when he was Babaji's disciple, traveled to Europe with Babaji. And, there was very small amounts of people. He'd go to people's houses, and there'd be, 5, 10 friends that wanted to meet him, new people, prospective practitioners, like he was just going to. People had come and seen him in India. Now they were forming small groups and centers around Europe. Maybe some places there were 100 or so. There was a lot of people in Denmark that really loved Babaji, and big, small country with a lot of people that ended up doing the meditation. And they went to one place in Europe, I can't remember where. Charji documented this in his diary. And a young couple was, some of the practitioners knew a young couple who the man in the couple had gone insane, and they were desperate to get help. And one of the Abhyasis recommended that they go see Babaji, and this wasn't really appropriate. Babaji was just there to give people connection to God through the transmission and cleaning. And, Babaji was a giving person because that's, the nature of a true spiritual person. And he stayed up all night reworking the person's mind, like the guy's mind, on a spiritual level. And he cured him, like he fixed it. And the couple was, grateful, but they left and they never came back. And Charji was like chastising the people, saying, look, Babaji doesn't have energy for this. Like he has, limited amount of life force left, and he's got his own mission, his own purpose here. It isn't to cure the insane, right? This isn't his job. And you guys need to protect him from that. You need to be aware he's got a giving, loving nature. If you bring somebody to him, he's going to try to fix them and help them. But that's not his job. It's your job to, I'm just bringing people who are capable of doing the system that Babaji has, provided for people. There's different services out there. Get the person psychological help or whatever, right? But Babaji isn't here to cure the sick or, cure the mentally ill. Like he's here to help the spiritual people who are able to connect to God, facilitate that connection, right? So I've heard these stories and I've seen these things personally, and I've seen these organizations and, these cult-like organizations and, things that are on the news. I watched the Waco thing with David Koresh and, just all these different, and there was some levels where David Koresh was a spiritual person with saintly qualities, but then he lost it, right? He lost it where he was, the only person to, there was these married couples in there, but they weren't able to procreate or have, relationships, sexual relationships. David Koresh would impregnate all the women because he was this, divine whatever, and God told him, and so it's what started off as, he had some positive qualities, but he was also manipulative and self-serving, and this is how all these things end up, right? With that element where the master of the system, the saint, ends up going south, or Trump, whatever, and ends up exploiting his followers who are life-sucking people who are desperate and needing prana and all these things, right? The disciples, and like what I've seen with the Heartfulness organization, all these people that got so much from Charji, and Daji more than anybody else. Daji was around him for his last 7 years of his life, and Charji poured himself into Daji as his successor, and Daji just completely dissed him. Like stopped celebrating his birthdays. I mean, if you guys see my Journey series, it's brutal. Like just a total punk move, and like so low, like, like beyond, just a fall, but going to where he's, political now, and he's hobnobbing with celebrities, and he's got no charisma, and his, everything sucks that he produces, and it's really bad. And then all the people who claim to love Charji, who'd run to see him, and, would like, sit outside of his cottage just so they could spend a few minutes with him and tell him how much they love him, and tell him, how much there's transformation there. I've just let this happen. And I've documented this in my Journey series. This will be part of my Journey series. I'll put this whole video in there. But it'll also go up, just as a video on its own. And so, there's all these people who just, claim to love him, but allowed this, not only allowed, but participated, collaborated in the fall of the system, turning from a spiritual organization to a cult. And, I had to cut myself free from it. It was starting to negatively affect me, where it had propped me up in the pranahuti, the transmission, the divine love that comes through the transmission, and this cleaning process, and all of it, the teachings, all the things that had benefited me and come through in this YouTube channel, the energy and the information, all these things that, are a big part of what I do here, was now like sucking me dry. It was like hurting me, stressing me out, and negatively affecting my spiritual condition, affecting my ability to connect to God internally, all these things that the organization that helped me in the past was now hurting me. And so I cut myself free from it, and I started this thing called Gratefullness, where it's just basically the Sajmarg system, but, that legally I can't call it Sajmarg because it's, there's another organization called that, right? An organization that's defunct. So it's doing the practice that I always did with the same teachings and the same everything. And I've done my best to preserve what I can preserve. But there are people who, want me to be kind of the new master of the system, like this new thing, right? They see me as a master, and no matter what I tell them that I'm not, they're like, well, they've experienced benefit, energy from me and this videos and knowledge and, transformational things. Many of them did Heartfulness, but now we're doing Gratefullness, because of they've experienced the same thing that I have. And they want me to step in and fill that role. And I said over and over again, I'm not a master. And, I've talked about it, and I've given explanations about that in different ways. But I'm going to do one that's completely, based on what I've already said here. I saw the way these guys sacrifice their needs for other people. Master Charji, and, I know Babaji through his teachings and people's stories of him. And then the first Master Lalaji, who, is not as... there's only a couple photos of him, so he's not as well known, but, I know what they did, and I know the attitude that they have. And I knew preceptors, I've met preceptors who exemplify this, people who are, they're married, they have kids, they have a job, but they spend their free time doing this work and cleaning people's hearts and transmitting. I did this work for a while. And some of them are just saintly gems of people, service-oriented. They just want to serve God, and devotional, and just saints, right? And I'm not that way. Like I don't care about people that way. I just don't. Like I don't, I'm compassionate, and I want people to do well. I want people to evolve. I want people to get the same benefits out of the system I did. And I'll help to a certain extent, but I'm not going to be sucked dry by, desperate, broken, bankrupt people that just can't, sustain this on their own. And, the masters of the system all died a little bit heartbroken by the participation of the Abyasis. And this has happened, with Jesus and his three, people who betrayed him. I mean, the whole thing. How did Jesus die? Was that a good death for him? Was he psyched about all the energy he poured into those people, and to have them turn on him, right? I mean, almost, to the person. Imagine what he felt to have, like, not only just the betrayal of Judas and, Peter denying him and Thomas doubting him, but just all of it, right? All those people who, he was serving, and they just, in the way that they were hating him and all that stuff, right? Like, that's just, a good example for you Christians. And it's happened to saint after saint, people who are crucified themselves, burned, prosecuted, ostracized by the religion, saintly people that people didn't accept. I mean, it's happened here, particularly in the West. We kill our saints. And, I'm not down with that, right? Like, I'm just, personally, I don't have it in me to exploit other people in this way that cult leaders do. And this isn't like me bragging, because it's just not in me. Like, I smoked pot and I did drugs and I drank alcohol, but I don't have any addictions and scars. And so it's very easy for me to give things up or stop doing things. Like, I drank coffee for so many years, but I started having these post-COVID heart palpitations and things. And, I drank chai every morning for like almost 30 years, right? And it wasn't very great for me. I could only drink a little bit of caffeine. Like, I'd put very little black tea in my chai. Like, a little bit of caffeine goes a long way with me. If I eat a piece of chocolate, like one little section of a piece of chocolate, I can just have a little bit of it, right? I just get wired. Very, susceptible to it. But, I needed to get off of it. It's been, I don't know, 4 months, 6 months. I'll never have it again. I'll never have chocolate again. Like, and I'm not tempted. Once in a while, like, that, I remember it being good, but it's just something I can't have anymore, and I'm fine with it, right? And that isn't me bragging, because, like, it doesn't have a hold on me like it does other people, right? Drugs and alcohol and these other things. Like, I can't brag about it, because it's not something that's a real problem for me. It's not hard for me to overcome that. And in terms of being a cult leader, I just don't like being around people. I don't like people serving me. And, I don't like people like fawning all over me. And I don't, I don't benefit from their collective whatever they would do for me. Like, whatever a cult leader gets, I don't want. Like, it's not in me. Like, I'm not interested. I don't want to be worshipped. I don't want to be adored by large amount of people. Makes me uncomfortable. I have enough love, in my system from the Sajmark system. I don't need, some lower forms of love, and, I don't need to be propped up by other people, and I can stand on my own spiritually. I don't need a group of people stroking my ego, telling me how great I am. I mean, I get positive comments here, and it's good to get them, but I don't get out of it like what other people do. I don't need my self-esteem boosted, by other people. Like, I know what I am. Like, I mean, in terms of, like, the negative comments don't affect me, because they're not true. And the comments that people think I'm better than I am, I'm not. Like, I know what I am. Like, I know my limitations, and, I know my own selfish thoughts and my own, my own whatever. Like, I meditate. I'm not running away from that stuff, right? And so I don't have any desire to be a cult leader. And I know how that ends up anyway, right? And, I don't have it in me to be a real spiritual leader, because I just don't care about the people. I'll do God's work. It'd be different if I was made official by Chargy, but I still would have failed in some way, because I'm lacking some of the qualities that you need. Of course, those things could be, given to you, or you could work on them. But if I had been made the, master of the system, and again, I'm not, I don't think I should have been. If I had been made, then there'd be something different, because I'd be responsible, and it would be something I promised Chargy I would do, I'd put in more effort. But in some unofficial capacity, where the only validation I have is that it's working, the Gratefullness system is working, I'm not going to take on other people's burdens. And I saw how it worked out for these other masters and people. it was a bummer for them, right? I mean, people just, they keep on sucking more out of you. Like they take a little bit of you and they just want more. And I've experienced that with just, people writing me long messages and telling me their life stories unsolicited, and just, I mean, like, I'm not, I mean, people are just so desperate to be seen and heard, and, they respond to the energy or the information they get from me, and they just want to dump their problems on me and want me to solve them. And, one guy wanted me to tell him what a piece of crap he was and tell him all the things he needed to change. And, like, why do I want that burden, right? I worked as a counselor, and, I don't want to hear other people's problems. I don't, I mean, I guess I have, compassion and empathy, but also I just, like, you got, deal with your own boop. Like, there's a system here, a system of cleaning and meditation that I use. If you can't use the system I use, then fine, but I don't have anything else to offer you, right? And so, like, I mean, that's how I view all this stuff. Like, it just seems like right now people are doomed, and we desperately need community. Like, people are going to have to come into community to deal with the future. But, there's communities where there's some sort of group people making all the decisions, the legislature, Congress and the Senate. And then there's the, an executive level community where there's one person, a spiritual leader, a king or something. And, both of them have their disadvantages. The group people can't, they're always fighting. They're always having different opinions, squabbles. There's power. They're all power hungry, whatever. Not all of them, but, there's good people on the committee, and there's selfish ones, and there's always going to be a couple of duds. It's just, there's always going to be a couple that suck and keep it down. And they fail to be able to govern, right? Make decisions, come together, and, they're often going to get things wrong. I mean, so that, we know what happens when things are ruled by committee. But it's when it's ruled by one person, a king or a, whatever, unless that person's really pure and, people aren't, then it's doomed. Like, it's doomed to fail because of that person is gonna, they're gonna get whatever they're getting out of it in their own some scaric, character flaws and things are going to be, when they get the power, these things are going to grow. When they get the power of leadership, things are going to emerge from their system, demonic things. And, their weaknesses are going to be exploited. And negative energy is going to come in, and it's going to destroy it's going to turn into a cult and destroy it. And the people are going to start weighing the person down. The person's going to start feeling bitter and resentful by all the desperate people coming up to them. And, this is a time where people need to stand on their own 2 feet. Like, you're going to have to find something inside of you, and the gratefulness meditation, the system I do, the pranahuti, the energy, and I have a YouTube channel filled with the stuff to help people do the system. And you got to connect on your own level and just, step up, rise up, pull yourself up by your own, heart straps and connect to God internally. This is the, sink or swim moment for humanity, where the system's collapsing, and only people who have fortitude and inner strength and the ability to, you need to lean on God and connect to God, but that's it, right? You need an internal relationship with God, not an imaginary one where your ego's pretending you're talking to God, but it's really your ego talking to itself, right? Like, a lot of people do that, but a real sustainable, authentic connection with the divinity within you, and pull yourself up, and then you can form organizations where everyone's, on the same sort of level, or at least, and you'll get, identical instructions from God internally, and you'll all know what to do, and there won't be any debate or whatever. Everyone will just see the wisdom in it. There'll be some people a little bit better off, a little bit more wisdom, a little bit more, some kind of shamanistic type of thing. But, the majority of people will be able to just do what's right and know what's right, and, not be all ego and not self-interested. And, that's the only way humanity survives. And if that doesn't happen, we're screwed. Either it's that or nothing. And, for everybody listening to this is your job. This is your mission if you choose to accept it. You got to stop being so desperate and needy and, whatever it is, and start, rising up to your own, the best version of yourself that exists in all of us. You have to be willing to face up to the negative things and work towards the connection with divinity. Again, there's a system that's designed for that. And, it's available through this other YouTube channel they've made, and all the information you need to do it is on it. And you either sink or you swim. And I'm not going to carry you through, or neither is anybody else. Like, it's up to you to do it. And it's not. I mean, whatever organization would come out of it has to be based in people rising up and being able to do that and become fully functioning, spiritual, the spiritual version, the soul version of yourself, the highest version of yourself. And you're not going to get that from your religion or like somebody like Trump or some, culty organization or some other, truthers or whatever it is. You're not going to get that from, anybody else or anything else. You got to get it from yourself. There's no saviors here. It's time to save yourself. If you can't do it, well, then, you have a failed existence, and your fate is determined by whatever the people that can rise up and do it will do it, right? And don't expect other people to pull you through. Like, you can get help, and when it's necessary, but you can answer your own questions and connect to God and have God tell you what to do. And people have been doing that and have done it successfully, even if for short periods of time, or just for 1 or 2 times in their lives or something. People connect with divinity and they can see what they're supposed to do and do it. This happens all the time. It's happening every day. And you can do it too, but you just have to be willing and, do whatever it takes to make it happen, right? Get it done. All right. So that's what I know about cults and spiritual organizations. And, it might seem like it's very specific here, but it's, cults are everywhere and spiritual organizations are, far and few between. What is it? Few and far between. Only spirituality will save this world. It's Paul Romano, definitely reporting from the Apocalypse and the Ascension. Everyone have a blessed day and be grateful.